Hello and welcome to the third part of this video series. Today, as mentioned in the last video, we are going to take a look at the approach charts or taxiway charts of airports. I would like to explain these charts using Hamburg as an example. Here are 3 examples for the VFR charts in the last chart as a small example for the IFR area, but I won't go into these in more detail. I can imagine that some of you are now overstrained with these charts, but I can promise you that they look much more complicated than they actually are. I must mention here that the illustrations and extracts from the AIP and aeronautical charts are not up to date and are not approved for navigation. Let's take a look at the maps of Hamburg from the beginning. Here we see the VFR terminal chart of Hamburg, but it's also called a connection chart because it shows the location of other airfields in a large radius. But this is only a large overview of the location of Hamburg Airport. Therefore, we now look at the usual operation chart, which is only a smaller section of this chart. This visual operation chart is actually the most important one for you. But what kind of information can be seen here? Let's first look at the upper part of this chart. We can see at the top above the line that this is a visual operation chart. In the middle is AD, which is the aerodrome section of the AIP. ELEV 53 simply means elevation, which indicates that the airport altitude is 53 feet or 60 meters above sea level. On the right side we see Hamburg and below EDDH. EDDH is the so-called ICAO code of Hamburg, which is structured as follows. The first letter E in the case stands for Northern Europe. For Southern Europe it would be an L. The second letter stands for the country, in our case Germany. It is important to note that ED is only the civil German airfields or airports. The military ones, such as Rostock-Lage, are ET. The third letter delimits the country more precisely, for example Northern Bavaria. In this case, however, Hamburg is an international airport and therefore this D simply stands again for the international airports in Germany. The last letter is usually the first letter of the airport, in our case an H for Hamburg. It is important to note that this rule is not always usable, as otherwise some airports would logically have the same ICAO code. Therefore, this code does not always make sense. But let us continue to look at this section of the visual operation chart. In the lower section, we see on the left the responsible sector of the Flight Information Service, FIS for short, which in this case is Bremen information with the frequency 125.100 MHz. Below we can read the frequency of the ATIS from Hamburg. What the ATIS is exactly, I will explain in another video, so subscribe to this channel to not miss anything. In the middle and on the right you can see the other frequencies for the different ground stations like apron, ground or the tower. Here's a little hint. You will be asked at the beginning of the radio certificate exam where these frequencies are located and what the one is that you would use. So remember which one you have to turn in and where it is. Behind it there's always EN and GE, which simply stands for the available languages of English and German. In the middle at the bottom we see the frequencies for the ILS of the runways. The ILS is the so-called instrument landing systems, which assists the pilot with the course, that means the direction to the runway, and the glide path, that means the altitude. VFO/R simply means that you can get a QDM or QDR on request. But what can you see on the map and what do you need to know? First of all, it is a normal map in which cities, towns, rivers, forests and roads are marked. In the middle we see first the airport, in our case Hamburg. This symbol shows by the star that the airport has an aerodrome beacon. Furthermore, the runway is drawn in its full length and not shortened with a symbol, as is the case at Finkenwerder, for example. Therefore, it is an international airport. While we are on the subject of such symbols, I can explain to you what the symbols mean in the case of Finkenwerder. The runway is painted, which means that the runway is paved. That means built of concrete, asphalt or similar material. And there's a kind of crosshair with 4 dashes around it. This means that the airport is used for both civilian and military purposes. The opposite would be marked in this case by Uetersen airfield, as this is an unpainted runway and without the 4 dashes in the circle, it is unpaved, that means with a grass runway and used exclusively for civilian purposes. Here I have a small overview for you. The first symbol is an airport that is used for civilian and military purposes. The second is a purely military airfield. The third is a civilian airport with a paved runway. The fourth is a civilian airport with an unpaved runway. And the last symbol shows a closed airfield where it is forbidden to land except in an emergency. There is always a dash shape around the airport. For better illustration, I will quickly color it blue. This frame indicates the area of the control zone that applies around the airport. That means, in other words, airspace delta. An entry into a control zone according to visual flight rules is only permitted with the approval of the responsible air traffic controller and usually takes place via mandatory reporting points designated in the visual flight charts. These often correspond to significant landmarks that are easily visible from the air, for example highways, interchanges or significant buildings, and are usually named after the compass direction in which they are located. For example, Whiskey 1 is a military point located approximately west of the airport. There are 2 types of reporting points. One's the mandatory reporting point, which must be reported with altitude information when flying over them. If a report is not possible at the time of the overflight, it can be made up for later with time information. And the other one, the so-called demand reporting point, which only have to be reported upon request of the controller. The reporting is then of course analogous to the mandatory reporting point. In Hamburg, by the way, we have 8 reporting points that are marked now red. On the map we see the following symbols. I color this one in red in the visual operation chart of Hamburg. These arrows are approach and departure routes that are mandatory flight routes for entering and leaving the control zone. These are either based on geographical features, for example rivers or highways, or are mandatory headings. If they are solid, they lead to the airport, and if they are dashed, they lead away from it. Otherwise, we can see all the obstacles, corresponding altitudes, which you of course have to pay attention to in flight. These are to be found in Hamburg, for example around the Außenalster a lot. Here runs an increased part of the map. Here we see towers, churches, the TV tower and other obstacles. If this blue circle is drawn above the symbols, they are lighted obstacles that glow during a night flight. In the map we see the following text at the borders of the control zone: CDR 2500 MSL D. Here it's enlarged so that you can also see it. This simply means that the upper limit of the control zone here is 2500 feet or 762 meters above sea level, and it's a delta airspace, where special weather conditions apply. I will make a separate video on the airspace structure, so subscribe to this channel for free to make sure you don't miss anything. While we are on the subject of airspace, you can see in the top left hand corner of the map that Charlie airspace over Hamburg extends from 2500 feet to flight level 60. That means up to 6000 feet. Delta airspace starts from flight level 60 to flight level 100, flight level 100. That means from 6000 feet to 10,000 feet. But I will go into this in more detail in the video about airspaces. Yes, that was the most important information you should know on a visual operation chart. If you need more detailed information, perhaps about special symbols that I have not mentioned, I will show you the legend of the ICAO charts, which is also printed on the back of each chart. You can now pause for a moment and read through it in more detail. I will also include the link to the legend in the video description. Yes, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next part where I will explain the rest of the charts, such as the taxiway charts. I would be very happy if you would appreciate my work by subscribing. If you have any further questions, please post them into the comments and I will try to help you.